but I'll run through this quick. That's the joy of talking every day. I can do something in an hour, do it in 10 minutes. So basically, what I'm going to talk about is the phosphorus research we've been doing in Mississippi. So this predates me all the way back to when Tim Walker first started. Actually, when he first started on his postdoc before he was in the rice position. So we've been doing phosphorus research in Mississippi since 2002. Historically, we didn't use a lot of phosphorus in rice. Then come along in the mid-90s, and the guys in Arkansas said, oh boy, phosphorus makes a difference, right? And then the other problem we have is our traditional soil test methods. They really don't work that well for phosphorus. They're only about 54% accurate. So we've been trying to figure out how to better predict yield with phosphorus, and we think maybe looking at soil pH, kind of like we do with our zinc recommendations, may help us put out phosphorus a little bit better on rice fields. And one thing that's a little more unique about Mississippi than the other side of the river is pretty much every bit of our rice ground is precision graded buckshot ground. Almost, I would say, Mr. Winston, 80%. Yeah. At least 80%. So that's the number I'm saying. It's probably higher than that today. That was a number I come up with the other day. But the depth of cuts can be skinny or they can be 3 feet deep. And when we have those deeper cuts, that's when we see a lot of these phosphorus issues. We can alleviate some of that with chicken litter, but it takes time. Okay, the other problem that we have in the Mid-South is if you look at this is the latest release in 2016 from IPNI, and this is based on state soil sampling data. And you see that number there for Missouri. I don't know how well that reflects y'all because y'all know in the Boot Hill, I'm not saying y'all get a lot of help down there, but I don't know where that number come from. I'm pretty certain y'all are pretty much close to Mississippi and Arkansas, where 74% of the samples in the lab come back phosphorus deficient, in Mississippi 75. Okay, so we've got a problem with phosphorus. We can see it in multiple different areas. So what's our solution to that? Well, we know that based on USDA surveys, less than 30% of producers are applying fertilizers other than nitrogen. All right. If you look at our rice budgets, and this was 2016, 2017 didn't change. It actually went down a little because the price of fertilizers went down. Roughly about 19% of your production budget's tied up in fertilization, okay? And for Mississippi, that doesn't include potassium because we basically only grow rice on clay soils for the most part. All right, and that's for a soil with a medium soil test level. So that can range from 30 and probably go down to 15. All right, if you look at the trends in Mississippi, this is what we see. And the alarming thing is when you look at the low and very low over the last 5 years, we've increased the percentage of samples coming into the lab in the low and very low category. So for instance, very low was 7 in 2011, and today it's over 20%. All right, one thing is if we're in the medium category, and we can stay in the medium category if we maintain that level, okay? So we don't want to fall off that cliff because once we fall off that cliff, it's hard to come back, all right? Everybody knows what phosphorus deficient rice looks like. This is a picture in Quitman County on some of the lighter dirt, all right? Again, I said we put in our soil test correlation calibration in 2002. Some of the first plots Tim had, you can see the stark difference between a small amount versus the untreated control. All right, we continue. These are pictures I think from 2015. This is a farm that actually these pictures come out of your rice tech trial, Jay, where we went out there to look at the trial. What the heck's going on? Didn't know. Come out there and look. Yeah, that's phosphorus deficient. Well, let's see what the soil sample had. Jay had the soil samples that I think they sent to Arkansas. It was like 12 parts per million. All right. This guy won't put out phosphorus. We can't talk him into putting out phosphorus. His consultant, and I know that's recording me, but his consultant, that's why I won't say who it is. His consultant soil tested half of his farm for free just to try to get him to put out phosphorus, and he still won't do it. So our objective in going through this was to collect data. Do what?
He should have charged it. He'd have done it.
Yeah. So, when do we need to put out the proper rate and time, and how did we identify this? As we identified fields like that one that has historically been phosphorus deficiency based off soil test maps as well as yield maps. So then what we want to do is look at multiple application times and look at multiple application rates and try to figure out, something coupled with Lancaster P, which is what we use in Mississippi. How do we get better? So what we did is we ended up, since 2002, we've got 1,300 observations, 516 of those responded, and that's our footprint of Mississippi rice, and we've had at least one test in each one of those counties over this duration. Most of them in Bolivar County, we've got that red, and in Tunica County, because that's where we grow the most rice in the state, in those two counties. We know that soil pH definitely influences P uptake in the rice plant, and this just shows that. The blue line is P uptake in a rice plant, and when that soil is pH 6, the orange line is when the pH is at 8. So we know we got issues there in the differences in pH. So how could that help us moving through looking at this data? When you start looking at the data, we've separated this out into all the site years in the data set, all 1,300 observations, versus the responsive sites, which only responded to phosphorus positively. All right, so this is tissue, and what we see is across rates, even in the whole data set, we get an increase in tissue concentration when we increase phosphorus rate. All right, that increase was a little more pronounced in the responsive site years. When you look at that in application timing, averaged over rate, we see that a 2-leaf application, which we favor in Mississippi, give us the greatest phosphorus tissue concentrations. When you look at the responsive site years, it was even more dramatic. Okay, so let me pause and go back. Did you see what I did? How that graph changed? All right, so that's all, that's none. That's the whole data set. Now we're jumping to pH above 7.5. Okay, so keep that in mind. When you look at that, broke out that rate and timing, and this is 2005 data set, just kind of to highlight those differences. You can see right here, even at a 5-leaf application, even waiting up to pre-flood, we were getting a huge difference, okay? So the people that tell you, you got to put that fertilizer out in the fall, you got to work it in. Phosphorus is highly water soluble. We were still getting responses out to mid-season and even boot on a specific field, and this field had a soil test phosphorus level of 6, okay? So we couldn't reclaim as much yield going out that far, but up until 5-leaf, we could still reclaim a fairly good amount of the yield that we would have lost had we not put out phosphorus or put out the wrong rate. All right, so getting into the crux of that, here's the grain yield when you look at application timing across all site years. All right, when we look at all site years, responsive, non-responsive, fall application was the best time it gave us the greatest grain yield. When you look at the responsive sites, it moved to a spring application. So spring applications for this data set, what that entails is anything in a year that we grew. So that's pre-plant, might have went out in February, might have went out in March, any time prior to that rice going in the ground. All right, so we increased our yield there. All right, that's dramatic in and of itself, but that's on all site years. When you just look at the site years with pH greater than 7.5, it increases dramatically. Okay, so if you look at all the site years, now the fall has fell off, and the 2-leaf application timing is the best. Spring right behind it, and that holds true on the responsive sites. Okay, so where we're at with this, where am I at on time? I got a little bit. Where we're at on this is if you're on buckshot soils and your pH is above 7.5, we really want you to move that phosphorus fertilizer application to in season, or at least into the spring. I know logistically that don't fit for a lot of us in the Mid-South, but I think this is very apparent, especially if you're on low soil test P sites, that we're probably losing a little ground if we're putting that P out in the fall. Okay? So this is a biggie. This is a diametric shift from what we've always done, and it's going to be an additional application expense. But in Mississippi, at least, we're still on a 2-leaf regiment where we're putting out 50 pounds of AMS and 50 pounds of DAP. I think what we need to do is just up that DAP rate or blend in some triple super with it to get our total phosphorus rate we need to maximize yield in that crop. And if you look at all our phosphorus data put together, basically this is what it suggests, is that on all site years, if we just use phosphorus, we're going to increase, okay? On our responsive site years, which would be classified as a soil test category medium or lower, you can see we got a great yield response, and I think that's right around 13 bushels. Now I'm going to tell you the bad part on the next slide. Soil testing still don't figure it out, okay? So what we know is if you're soil tested, and I don't think it matters if it's Lancaster or Malik 3, if it's below 30 parts per million, you've got the chance to get a response to phosphorus. But we can't tell you if you're going to get it or not. Because if you look at this cross section here, in our responsive sites, less than 10% or less than 10 was 46, less than 20 was 62, less than 30, and that's cumulative, right? So 46%, 62%, 85% was less than 30. But if you look over here at the correlation calibration, what that tells you is even though we got 85% of our responsive sites below 30 parts per million, we got just as many white dots over there too. So where we've been forever is if you're below 30 parts per million, you might get a response. I think if you couple that data we showed, showing if you're below 30 parts per million and your pH is above 7.5, you've got a greater chance of getting a response if you move that phosphorus application to the springtime up until 2-leaf stage. And basically that's what I was saying in my summary slides, and I think we've got a couple minutes left. But at the end of the day, you know, what we need is a better soil test extractant for rice soils, and that goes across state lines.
Being that same consultant that did the free sampling, can he pull it in the spring at 2-leaf, and can you see a difference in the spring?
I think that you should be able to, because that soil test might be a little greater in the spring than it will be in the fall. If you look at the soil drying and stuff, what we've observed is K and pH are predominantly influenced more by a dry versus a wet sample than P.
My question has always been to my guys that put it out in the fall, and then that flood up for ducks almost immediately.
Yeah, that bothers me.
You have shot yourself in the foot. You know, that
Well,
was a wasted application.
That's the
Is
same.
that your opinion, or?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a wasted application, depending on how they put the water on the field. But I think they're changing the phosphorus form. Okay, just like you know why we don't grow corn after a rice crop. So you're changing that form of phosphorus with that duck water, and then when you come off, you got this short time of aeration before you flood it back again, and you've locked it up in forms that's just going to be unavailable to the rice plant.
How long do you think the drying time?
Now I'm walking out on a limb that's going to snap behind me if I tell you that, Amy.
But I mean, just so like if a guy doesn't drain until February and he's planting the first week of April, in my opinion, that's probably not enough.
That's,
time
in
to
my
get it
opinion,
back.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, but we don't have any data to back that statement up. But I do agree with you there. I think it's got to be a considerable amount of time of drying to get it back. But it's just like the guys that are growing corn, and they fertilize in August and September as soon as it comes off, and then they throw a match on it behind it to burn up all the stubble. You know, that's, I think, maybe throwing good money behind bad, but that's what I have. We're getting close to Sonny informing you. We got 4 more minutes. You got any more questions for me or Mike?
I'm just joking.
I got a man from Arkansas talking to some of the soil science people. The extraction method, from what you said, is not good.
I'll tell you, Arkansas's extraction method while I was there, and I don't know if it's improved anymore, but I think it's about 56% accurate for P.
So I've been told not to dispute what you just said, because we don't have a good extraction method, you're wasting your time putting P on. And because as soon as the flood hits it, it releases the phosphorus and everything's fine after that. But so my other question, and that's just a comment, is because of what I've heard. So And I've actually been told that anytime you put P on heavy clay gumbo, you're wasting your money because we don't really know what's there. So,
Right.
but the other question I got is a lot of consultants recommend ammonium sulfate, and it makes it look pretty and everything looks great. And but do y'all feel like that we're actually getting our money's worth on heavy clay ground with ammonium sulfate?
I think you get in two situations. One, we're not getting in a sulfur hole on our soybean crop because we're putting sulfate on our rice, okay? So you keep in mind, Amy was talking about rotations, it goes two ways. Secondly, we've got data published that says you get a yield increase from it. Two things that we think in Mississippi. One, that 2-leaf application is going to help you come out of command injury a little quicker, and it's going to get that rice up and to flood earlier.
But is it giving bushels?
We've got published data saying it's giving bushels.
If you go to flood earlier, it will generally make you yield better. Generally.
Yeah, I think I'd have to look it up, Ralph. I don't want to lie to you, but it's a couple hundred pounds. It was small, but it was bushels. And Tim Walker published that. Tim and Jason did that work in like 2005, 2006, when we first started coming in with those recommendations.
Louisiana has some studies where they're not showing bushels, but there's still a huge gain in efficiency with going to flood earlier. But also, I think it evens out the maturity of your crop.
Yeah.
So your fungicide application is a lot more.
But
Has a lot more.
going back to your first question, Mike. Yeah, our data says just like Arkansas, we really can't tell nothing with the soil test. We know you got the potential below 30. We can't tell you if it's going to happen. But if you couple that with pH above 7.5 on buckshot soils, I think the difference between not doing anything at 6,900 pounds of rice and putting out a 2-leaf application and getting 9,100 pounds of rice, and that's averaged over about 500 observations. So there's a lot of plots that went into making that.
But the key is over 7.5.
I think that's the thing we've been missing. Is the key is when you're at extremely high pHs, and most of our ground in Mississippi is greater than 7.5 and pushing 8.2.
They had two together to get 7.5.
Do what?
So we'd have to have two together to get to 7.5.
We've got a huge problem with pH, and we can't bring it down.